Alright, again, we're going to go over Chapter 6 right now. To me, in my humble opinion, hardest chapter in the book. Alright, if you have your book with you, starts on page 163. I'm going to go back and forth between this and what's in the book. I'm going to go over the examples that are in the chapter, and I've also got them in a folder. I've got to email it to you, and I will do that in a little bit. So the author says at this point you have all the, for lack of better words, at this point you know enough JavaScript to be dangerous. That's not meant to be funny. I don't think it is funny. All right, but what I'm saying is you know enough that if you do the wrong thing, you could really screw a system up. Or if you could figure out how to do something where you tried to screw a system up, you might be able to really screw a system up. But one thing we haven't talked about is this thing called the DOM. DOM is an acronym. It stands for Document Object Model. So we're going to talk about in here a lot of the stuff regarding the DOM. All right, some of the major properties and methods. Then we're going to look at this thing called the FAQ application. If you would please look up on the screen here, because I have that up here someplace. Or I did. Hopefully I didn't get rid of it. And I might have closed it. All right, that's okay. Grab it right now. Let's see. Again, what I'm showing you on the screen right here, it's a folder called DOM. Let's see how big it is. 400, it's not big at all. No, next week. All right, so I just literally right now sent you this. This has got all the stuff that we're going to go over in Chapter 6. All right, so let's get to it. We're going to go over this FAQ application just so you can see it. All right, I'm going to bring it up right now. Have you ever, I'm asking you, have you ever seen anything that looks like this? See that? This is one way of creating this. Typically these are called accordions, because you know how an accordion kind of, you can do that with an accordion. It's the same kind of an idea. This one, you can have all three of them open, any two of them open, any one of them open, or none of them open. Make sense? So we're going to go over how that's done, all right, when we get to that part of the chapter. Then we're going to look at how this stuff works with forms, all right? So we'll take a look at all of that stuff in here, all right. They talk about coming in here and looking at the DOM core specification. You can read that. You can go out and you can go out to w3c.org and type in DOM. You can get thousands of pages on the DOM. All right? And that's all fine and dandy, but let's just look at it and see what it means. If I go in and create this, now look on the screen if you would, please. I'm going to grab every bit of this, and I'm going to copy it to the clipboard, and I'm going to just throw it in here. I got to get rid of the stuff, this junk. All right. But I want you, I mean, I'm not trying to waste my time or your time, but I want to put this in so hopefully it'll make sense to you. All right. So I'm just going to save this to the desktop. And I'm just going to call it dom.html. All right. This is exactly what is shown in the book. Look on the screen, please. That is this. So what's shown in the book on 165? All I did was copy it to the clipboard. All right. So I'm going to run it, and that's what it looks like. Not much. I think you'd agree. Not much. All right. But it's fine. The point is, when we come in there and we key in this, what gets created for us is this. That's the DOM. The DOM is a picture of everything that you have put into your HTML file. All right? And it is especially important for anything you put into your HTML file that you gave an ID to or you gave a class to. All right? Why? Because if you want to make that 100 grand a year, if you learn how to program the DOM, you can make 100 grand a year. And you won't have to be out of school very long before you can make 100 grand. Most people have a hard time with this. Why? Because it's hard. And a lot of people give up. This is just too hard to do. You figure out an easier way to do it, and you might be able to do it in an easier way, but it won't be as powerful. All right? Now, Mr. Corrigan next door, he was telling me how, I don't know the backstory behind it, but he just bought himself, I think he said, a 98 Trans Am. All right? His son saw it. What did he say right away? Well, I want that. All right? But the point is, the guy who had the Trans Am went and he put a bunch of stuff. He made the engine, which was already pretty souped up, even more souped up than it was. All right? So, why am I telling you this? What is the tie-in? Because the DOM is like souping up an engine. If you learn how to manipulate this, there's nothing on a web page you can't do. Nothing. All right? Now, one thing to realize. I think you'd agree. That says ID. There might be other things in there that say ID, but at least that right there says ID. Correct? All right. So the ID of the form is email_form. So if I'm going in there and I'm putting in code and I say document.getElement by ID, and I put in there email form, and I set that equal to my form, equals that. Or remember, we have our shortcut if we set it up for this, where that only has to be $, right? All right. So what that means is now I can use my form to manipulate anything that's on that form. Anything. All right. Typically, when you work with the DOM like this, not always, but typically, you're working with IDs to do one of two things. Either to prettify it, you want to make something a different color. So if I tell you to fill out this form and I say this field is mandatory, but you don't fill it out, I might make it go pink or red. See what I'm saying? All right, that's one way. The other way is to use JavaScript with it, to make it sing, dance, or do whatever. So if I want to animate it, if I want it to flash across the screen, I can do that. I can do whatever I want to do with it. So again, this is the actual hard code. This is the document object model that gets created. Couple things. First of all, notice the green stuff. First of all, does it look like this? Does it actually look like? Who the hell knows? That's like when people say, show me computer memory. And I've seen people draw it where it looks like this, and I've seen people draw it where it looks like this. Who knows? It's computer memory. It's in the memory of the computer. No one knows. But what they're saying basically is something like this gets created. All right? And look at this. What's at the top? HTML. The HTML has what in it? It's got a head section and a body section in it. The head section has what in it? A title that's made up of text. The body has an H1 and a form. The H1 has text. The form has a label, an input, and a span. And the label and the span have text. You say, well, I get that. Yeah, there's more to it than that. But the point is, when you look at these things that are green, you look at these things that are green, and you look at this one. So if I look at these four and this one, would you agree there's nothing underneath them? Would you agree with that? There's nothing underneath this, or this, or this, or this, or this. Typically, those are called leaf nodes. In other words, they don't have any children. Does it make sense to you looking on the screen? Label, input, and span. These three things are children of form. This text is a child of H1. This text is a child of title. Head and body are children of HTML. All that makes sense? Because that's when you do what's called walk the DOM, when you can traverse your way through it, you've got to understand stuff like that. All right? So, document, root node of the DOM. Element. So these are all elements right here. Those are all elements. ATTR. If I say, Keegan, how old are you? And you say 22. All right? Then the element might be your age, and 22 would be the attribute. Does that make sense? It's the value. All right? And notice as it says, text cannot have a child node. There can't be anything underneath it. Now, the author's actually making this pretty simplistic. It's more detailed than that. But I think it's one of those where I'm going to give you as much as I think you can handle type of an idea. All right? So as it says, the DOM is the document object model. It's a hierarchical collection. That's what this is. This, look at it as a family tree. All right? My mother is still alive. So there's my mom. All right? My mom there's actually 5 of us, but let's say that she had only me and maybe my sister. All right? Then with me, all right, I'd have to have 3 things here because I've got 3 kids. One of my kids has a kid. That's the hierarchicalness of it. Does that make sense? Sometimes when people describe it, it's like an org chart at work. You've got a president, maybe 2 or 3 vice presidents, people underneath them, and them, etc. All right. Everything that's in here, these are all known as nodes. Why do they use that name? I don't have a clue. But they call them nodes. And the reason that that's important is a lot of the stuff that we will look at will have the word node in it. All right? The DOM for a web page is built as the page is loaded by the web browser. You can use JavaScript to modify it by modifying the DOM. Whenever you modify the DOM, the browser almost immediately will show the change. That's why, like I said, if you go in and you modify the DOM, so I've got this form, and I want that form, the thing that I just showed you right here, this thing. If I want to set it up so that we come in here and maybe I add a button to this, and if you click the button, well, this will put a message here that says that's mandatory. And if you leave that off, how could you join an email list without putting in your email? Wouldn't that be kind of stupid? So what we're saying here is to join the email list, you don't need to give a name. All you need is an email address. All right? Now, there might be more things we have to do. For instance, if I go in there and I put in jpscott@brainkin.edu, boom, it comes back. You're now on our email list. What if I type in again, jpscott@rankin.edu? Shouldn't it come in and tell me there's already somebody registered with that email? So that's more code that you'd have to put in. Otherwise, it would allow me to keep registering. I could register every day or several times a day. That would be dumb, but if I don't put in code, it'll allow me to do it. All right.
I know you said some websites, they don't have it to where you can't put your email address in and re-register. They have it to where like you just don't get an email saying you registered again.
That's possible. Some websites too, they want your first name. Some want your first name and your last name. Some want just your email address. It just depends on what the company that you're dealing with, what they want. Period. All right. The properties of the node interface. These are things, don't right now, as we're working on these, don't worry about memorizing them. Now, I'm going to do this. All right, so these are things that you will eventually work with. Okay? Node value, that's what's inside of a node. So for text, if I've got an H1 that I created, and that H1 says, hello class, all right, then the node is the H1. The node value is hello class. That makes sense? All right, parent node, remember when I just showed you this thing? I'm not going to go back to it. We had HTML on top, and then underneath that you had head and you had body. HTML is the parent node. You can be both a parent and a child. I am. I'm a parent of 3 daughters. I am a child of 1 mother. All right, that kind of thing. You can have more than 1 child node. Okay? Again, if you look at this as being like a family, my oldest brother, Dick, is the first child. My sister, who was born after 4 boys, is the last child. Does that make sense? All right. And the next element sibling, guess what? You've already used this. Even though we didn't. Yes, we did. If you remember, I showed you an example where we had like a red asterisk, and if you left something off, it gave you a message that said like invalid input.
Yeah.
We use next element sibling. We use that. So you're going to see that again. All right. Now, 2 really important words. You're going to hear these words now. You're going to hear these words next semester. You're going to hear these words the semester after that. And you're going to hear these words the semester after that. 2 little words. Get and set. I've used this example with you before. First day of class. Okay. Keegan walks in first. Said, hello, I'm Jeff Scott. I'm going to be your instructor. What's your name? And he says, Keegan. Okay. That's a get. I ask a question. You give me something. Does that make sense? All right. So I say, Keegan, guess what? We only have 2 people in here, and they're both named Keegan. That's going to be too confusing. So what's your middle name? And you say James. So I say, can I call you James? You're like, well, that's a little weird, but okay. All right. Why am I telling you that? That's a set. If you have something that either doesn't have a value and you give it a value, or you have something that does have a value and you change it, you are setting it. Now, next semester, towards the end of the semester, we'll talk about databases. Okay? When we talk about databases, there's 4 things that you can do in a database. You can add new things. For instance, from what I heard, I think we just hired a new diesel instructor. He got entered into the Rankin database. That make sense? That's a create. All right? Let's assume it didn't happen, but let's assume that next week I found my dream house, and I sold mine and I moved my house. All right? That's not a create. That's an update. I'd have to update my address. Make sense? So that's a create and an update. All right? Now, it's the end of the semester, and I'm not planning on this, but I just decided to retire. All right? So they delete me from the Rankin database. That's a delete. Does that make sense? Somebody comes in and says, can you print me out all the information about Jeff Scott? That's called a read. See what I'm saying? So there's a create, there is a read, there is an update, and there is a delete. All right, the reason I'm telling you that is you put the first letter of each one together. No joke, it's called CRUD. That's literally what it's referred to as in database terminology. And the reason I'm telling you that is the read is a get. You can't change any information. You can only receive information. All right, the create or the update or the delete, that's a set because you're changing things. Again, who cares? Well, notice, if you've got something that is on the right-hand side of an equal sign, it's a get. If you've got something that's on the left-hand side of an equal sign, it's a set. All right? Does that make sense? So on the right-hand side of an equal sign, it's a get. That's like saying, you know, I ask you your age, and you say 22. So I say age equal 22. All right? I'm getting that. I'm getting the value of 22, and I'm getting it and assigning it basically to age. All right. So an interface describes the properties and methods of an object. Fine. When you DOM script, you often use properties of the node interface. Again, those things. You don't memorize them, but you know where to look for them. All right. There's a good chance on your next program that you will be asked to use, it might be VMI, it might be something else, but you're going to create something that's going to use this DOM stuff. All right. In the examples above, they're using the $sign instead of that get document.get element by ID. All right, methods. These are probably three of the most important things in the class. You've already looked at get element by ID. These are not them. First one, get elements. Notice, do you notice all three of them say elements, not element? See that? If you say get element by ID, you can only have one. If you say get elements by tag name or by class name, you can have multiple ones. I could do it by tag name. Look at the example they give here. Kind of important. Take a look at this example here in blue. That says, go through the document and find me all A tags. How do I know that? Because it's get elements by tag name. If I wanted all of the paragraphs, I'd put a P there. If I wanted all the H1 tags, I'd put an H1 there. Does that make sense? All right, so that's that one. All right. And so that's, again, that's get element by tag name. All right. The get elements by name is not used as often. All element objects descended from that have a name attribute that matches the specified name. This one says, give me everything with that class. So if I come in and I say, let's say that I've got a class that I create that I call big text. And what it does is it makes the text double the size. That makes sense? And I give that to an H1, to an H3, and to a paragraph. All right, I give it to those three things. If I said get element by class, big text, it would find those three things. And that's what they're showing in here. It's another one of those things that's available. Most of the time people don't. You could use it for a lot of different things. But I'm saying that typically it works better when you'd use one of the other ones. All right? So here's some of the common methods that you use this. Has attribute. Does it have something? What is the attribute? What if I want to know if this div, remember what a div is? If I want to know if this div has a paragraph, I could use that. If I wanted to grab that paragraph, I could use get attribute. If I wanted to change the text that was in that paragraph, I could use a set attribute. If I wanted to remove the paragraph, I could use a remove attribute. So there's a lot of ways in which these things can be used. All right. Here are some of the things. This is typical properties available with a DOM HTML spec. All right. What it's saying is every element can have an ID, can have a title, can have a class associated with it. It doesn't say everyone does. It says every element can. And it is possible for an element to have both an ID and a class. You can do that. All right. A tags have an href. Images have a source and an alt. Input has a disabled. All right. If you want to read some of this stuff, you can go right here. I'm just telling you, this is not a joke. It's really dull reading. All right. My wife asked me yesterday, she said, did you watch any of the impeachment hearings during your lunch? And I said, well, I started to, but to be honest with you, they were pretty boring. That's what a lot of this reading is. Pretty boring. It's good stuff. And if I was going to be doing this for a living, where I was constantly going to be doing DOM manipulation, you bet your butt I would take a look at that. But if it's like 300 pages, I wouldn't print it out. I try to get a PDF copy and I'd have it up all the time. So if I needed it, I could grab it. I'm working on something for the class right now that I may or may not end up doing. And one of the things is, I guess I don't have it here, but I grabbed this document that was online and it literally was 150 pages. I'm like, you know what? I don't want to print that out. I'm never going to actually read the thing, so I made it a PDF. First I made it in a Word document, and then I changed it to a PDF. So what they're saying here is when you look at this, the DOM can simplify you working with stuff. It can be a shortcut. That said, learning it ain't easy because there's a lot to learn. All right? So it says the HTML spec provides shortcuts to make it easier to work with the DOM. All right? The spec is composed of interfaces. In other words, there's a bunch of stuff that's been written for you already. So let's look at this. This is that FAQ application. You already saw this. So let's just break it down and look at the pieces. All right? Now I'm telling you this, and if you don't like what I'm saying, sorry, but can you still all read that okay? There should be nothing in here that doesn't make sense to you. There should be nothing in there. You already know how you set up the body. Main just has an ID. All right? So let's look at what has IDs. Main does. What else does? Doesn't look like, just looking at it real quickly, like much else does. Okay? But you'll notice we've got a div here. We've got a div here. We've got a div here. Why is that important? Because if I'm doing it and I'm grabbing every element by tag name, div is a tag name, right? So I could do things to all divs at the same time if I wanted to do that. You could. It depends on what we want to do with this. All right? And it depends on what's inside of here. Yeah, yes, you could. So here's some CSS. Again, look on the screen. There really and truly should be nothing in there that you don't understand. If you look at, you go, what the hell is h2 dot minus? That's what puts the minus sign or the plus sign there. Okay, that's all it is. And he's like, what's div open and what's div? Look on the screen. Right now, it's a hard question for you, not meant to mean to be funny. Which one of these is open? Which one of these three is open? First one, right? The other two are closed. Since the other two are not open, it says display none. So in other words, don't show the paragraph. The other one is open, so display the paragraph in a block format. All right? Now, let's look at the JavaScript for it. All right? Again, I'm not going to say to you, hey, we're going to go over this. I'm going to give you this for 5 minutes, and it's going to make total sense to you. It's probably not. All right? I still find when I go through this stuff, I usually learn something. You know, occasionally a student will say, oh, that's kind of like this. And I'm like, wow, that was really good. I never thought about it in that way, but you're right. So, what do we have here? Look on the screen. Use strict. Then we've got this. Remember this? I put it on several lines, but they put it right there. That's aliasing. So instead of saying document.getElementById, you only need to use the $sign. All right? So what are we doing here? This is a great name. Toggle means if you click it and there was a plus sign there, make it a minus sign. If there was a minus sign there, make it a plus sign. Does that make sense? All right. Now, this is a little bit confusing. No joke intended. See this? Most programming languages have a special variable called this. This, T-H-I-S. What does this mean? It means whatever's active. So if I just clicked, I asked you before, Keegan, and you said the first paragraph, or the first sign was the one that was clicked on. That would be this. So it's which one of the H2 tags did you click? If there's 3 H2 tags, one's that? There's 1, 2, 3 H2 tags, right? Whichever one you clicked on, that's the active one. That's this. Technically, no. You can only click on one of them at a time. Only one of them can be active. So what we're saying is this is going to be the active one. All right? Then it says, okay, var div equals h2.nextSibling. What the heck is that? It's what comes right after the H2. Well, let's look. You tell me. What comes right after the H2? A div, and a div, right? In some ways, what we're kind of doing is it's like if you've ever had like draw your own homemade map to show people, or if somebody says to you, you want them to come to your house, and you're like, well, how many miles after? Hell, I don't know. But you're going to go down this road and you're going to pass a Walmart. The block after the wall, see what I'm saying? You kind of designate stuff. That's kind of what we're doing here. All right. Now, it says toggle the plus and minus. In other words, what this is saying is, if it was open, close it. If it was closed, open it. Does that make sense? Now, I want to go back because Maya asked actually a really good question before. Could you click on a bunch of them at the same time? It depends on the software you're using. But typically on a web page like this, no. All right, the system has to know what it is you're trying to open. There wouldn't be any way technically, if you have this, that I can click on all 3 of these at the same time. All right, you say, well, what if I draw like, highlight all of them type of thing? What if I do that? No, that isn't going to work either. All right. So again, that's what's doing in here. Is it saying if it was a plus, make it a minus. If it was a minus, make it a plus. All right. Then this onload, that's what you do when the program starts. Do you hear me? That's what you're doing when the program starts. And you're letting the system know in this bit of code that we see right here, we're letting the system know we're setting up all our get elements by tag name, so all of our H2 elements will be in there. So all 3 of them are. So we're using them like a collection. Now, you said before, well, what if I use a name? See, the thing is, the reason you don't use that get name much is typically either you'll have an ID associated with it, so it'll be a get element by ID, or you'll have a class name associated with it, which is get elements by class name. All right. I think personally they came up with that kind of like as a, well, this doesn't really fit into anything type of an idea, and that's when you'd use it. All right. All right. So, guess what? You know how forms work. You may or may not agree with that, but you know how forms work. So if we look at this example right here, if you look at that form that they show on the top here of page 177, all right, we've got 2 labels, 2 text boxes, and a button. Do you agree with that? All right. Notice with the email address and the first name, they both have IDs. All right. Notice that the button has a type and it has an ID. All right. The labels, if you look at it, you almost never want to do anything special with labels because they're labels. You ever look at a form either online or a paper one that says Mr., Mrs., whatever, something like that? That's what that is. All right. But the things you're going to most apt to want to change are what goes in that text box, what goes in that text box, and you'll want something to happen when you click the button. Does all that make sense? All right. So, attributes of the form element. Name. It's the name of the form. We don't use that. You use name when you're working on server-side stuff. That's third semester. Action. That's what you want to have happen when you click that button. Usually you're making it go to another file someplace. And method. Method is a get or a post. Get, remember I just told you about CRUD? Get is like read. Get says, hey, show me something, don't let me change it. Post says, let me change it. All right. Now you can read all the stuff that's in here yourselves. The key one, though, if you look up on the screen, is this one. Because we're going to be looking at data validation. You never want to let junk into the system. Especially, you never want to let junk into your database. Why? Because data is what's called the lifeblood of a company. It's what matters. You know, I've said this before. Maybe I've even made the same analogy in class. I don't know. But I call it the Mack truck syndrome. I'm leaving here tonight, and somebody just literally pulls out of nowhere, hits me, and kills me. All right? Tomorrow, you probably won't have class. But Monday, you will. They'll have somebody replace me. Why? Because I'm not irreplaceable. Data is irreplaceable. If I've got in my database who owes me money, how much they owe me, when they owe it to me, and that data is removed, now I don't know who owes me money and when it's due. If I haven't backed it up, that's why data matters. All right. If we lost all the data for this place, let's say it's worst case scenario. Let's say that it's first week of class, and they go to run a report to see who hasn't paid yet. And now, boom, all that data is gone. They have no idea who hasn't paid yet. And let's say a lot of people haven't paid yet. Unless they can recover that, what do? That's a good question. I have no idea what they do.
I was about to say, do you know what they would do?
I would think they would try to have people prove that they've paid. You know, if you paid with a debit card, let's just say, I don't even know if you can, but let's say you paid with a debit card, that you could get a receipt, an online receipt. All right? But what are you going to do? Let's say Keegan paid with cash. And he walked in there, and they never gave him a receipt. It was the end of the day. He can't prove it. Nobody remembers him. All right? I mean, I could see you coming in there and being a little upset. Hey, I paid. Screw you. I paid and I'm coming, etc. What are they going to do? All right? Stuff like that occasionally does happen. All right. So we want to validate. We want to make sure that anything that is going to go into our database, and we're starting here with a form, but anything that's going to go into there has been validated. We want to make sure that it's good, that it's valid information. And again, that should make sense. All right? So now what they're showing in here are, if you're working with a text box or a text area or a select. In other words, you know what a text box is, right? A text area, remember, is just a text box with multiple lines. And a select is either a drop-down list or it's a list box. We've worked with those too. Would you all agree with that? All of those have a property called value. That's whatever's inside of there.
You said select is either a list or what?
It could be a list box. It could be a drop-down list. Remember when we did that thing where we had states and I had you put in that code where we had the state abbreviations? That's an example. All right. So notice what we've given names to. Name equal name, ID equal name, name equal comment, ID equal comment, name equal country, ID equal country. So those are the things we will want to validate. Does that make sense? I mean, there could be a whole heck of a lot more. So notice the JavaScript code. Look on the screen here. It says go out to the form, grab the value in the field that's identified with an ID of name, and assign it to my JavaScript variable called name. Do the same thing with comment. Does it make sense? Now, if there's nothing inside of there, I haven't chosen anything. I didn't put anything in for the name. I didn't put anything in for the country. Give me an error. Please enter a name, or I guess it's not the country, the comment. Please enter a name, please enter a comment. This one's different because we're going to have 3 countries in there. It's like United States, Canada, and Spain or something like that. But at the top it says, please enter a country. So if you've got a drop-down list that's got 4 things in it, this is the first one. Dash, 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 dash. And then here you've got United States. Here you've got Canada. And here let's just put in Mexico. All right? Does it make sense to you there are actually 4 entries in there? Does that make sense? But only 3 are valid. Does that make sense? That means you haven't chosen anything. All right? That's why a lot of times when you've got states, I showed you how we can put in there under Missouri, we can say selected, so it automatically puts Missouri in there. What if we didn't want that? If we didn't put please select a state, guess what? Which one gets selected by default? Alabama, because it's first. All right? And, you know, Wentzville, Alabama. Is there one? I don't know. But somewhere along the line it's going to fail when it looks at the zip code or whatever. All right? So this means we haven't made a choice. We're not allowing it to be blank, but that's the equivalent of it being blank. All right? And that's what they're saying in here. So you'll notice that if it is equal to nothing, so if it's USA, boom, is United States, Canada, or Mexico. Otherwise, it hasn't been chosen. All right? And that's exactly what they're saying here. So if we look here, I'm on the bottom of page 179. The name and ID are almost always set to the same thing. The name is what you do on the server side. If you say, I don't know what that is, because we haven't taken that class yet. The ID is what's on the client side. That's what you've been working on all semester. All right? After you use the value property, it says you can use the length property to check and see if there's anything in there. Setting the value property replaces what's in there. So you've got a lot of ability to go in and make changes. Radio boxes and checkboxes. You know what these are. Notice they have values. All right? And also notice they have a property called checked. If I've got something that says gender, so I've got a field here, this says gender. And I've got male, female. And this one looks like this. That means it's the default, all right, selection. Does that make sense? But the good news is once something is clicked, it can't be empty anymore. Now, maybe this isn't fair to you, but if you looked at this campus, there are probably a few hundred guys and about a dozen women. So you probably wouldn't set the default to female. Does that make sense? All right.
So wait, once you set, like once you get past the default,
what I'm telling you is if you have radio buttons, a group of radio buttons, If you've got one set as the default, then something has always got to be set. If you don't have one set as the default, so if nothing is set, once you click any one, from then on, one will always be set. That's just the way it works. Checked is the one that you have checked. And it's whether it's a radio button or whether it's a checkbox, doesn't matter. All right, stuff you use with forms. If I create a form, I'm not going to sit there and draw out a bunch of stuff for you. But if I create a form, let's just say it has a first name, it has the last name, and it has an email address. Both with me? It's got two buttons here. It says submit, and it says reset. When you click submit, you're sending that information from the form someplace, over the internet. We don't care. All right? Pushing that button makes a submit happen here. Does that make sense? If I press reset, it just sets all these back to their default values, probably blank. So if I click the reset button, the reset is what gets hit. So typically when you do that, reset, like I said, just resets everything to its default values or starting values, and submit actually submits the form. All right? You should remember this. Hopefully we talked about this before. Whatever control is active, that's the one with a focus. Does that make sense? Look on the screen. So if I come in here and I type Jeff, that's got the focus. But if I take my mouse and I click here, right there, so I'm going to put in my last name, two things happen. This gets a blur event, and this gets a focus event. So when you go from one control to another, the control you were on gets a blur, the control you move towards gets a focus. Why does that matter? Well, what if this field right here, I don't know, let's say I only wanted to let letters in there, just letters, A through Z. I could check once I clicked here, and if that check fails, if I put in blanks or special characters or whatever, I could say, don't have the focus there. Have it go back to where you were. So I can go in and I can write code to make whatever I want to have happen. All right? So these are the events on focus, on blur, on click, on double click, etc. And they show you some examples. The only way this is going to make sense is if you start writing some of it. All right? All right, now there's another application in here. It's called the register application. Let's take a look at it first. All right. Again, I sent all this stuff to you before. So this is called register. All right. And I'm going to open this up. Okay. Anybody want to guess what's going to happen when I click right here? Look on the screen if you would. Does that make sense? Now notice, since the contact me by, look at this. That's the only one that doesn't have anything by it because we have pre-selected an option. Notice when I come in here, I'm going to type in hello. See that all we checked was, is there something there? We didn't say, was it valid? We just said, is there something there? So for mobile phone, I'm going to type in hello again. Notice how that's gone. Here, I have to choose one of these three. I have to. Otherwise, that message will stay there. Here, I can choose anything. And if I accept, notice I've been registered. Now, that is stupid because it's got my email as hello and my phone as hello. All right, they're assuming that most people could come in here and put in that and that and that, etc. All right? And they can accept service. Now notice with this in there again, I get all the messages, but please look on the screen. If I click reset, does that make sense? So when I click this, a submit occurs. When I click this, a reset occurs. That's exactly what the author is saying right there. So you should be able to look at this HTML that's shown here on the bottom of page 185, and really it should make sense. You've actually created forms that are at least this hard, if not harder. All right? Here's the JavaScript. This is the first time you are actually seeing, this is on 187. This is the first time you're actually seeing some validation take place. All right? Look on the screen if you would. Your JavaScript variable called email is whatever value we put in for the email. Your phone is whatever value we put in for the phone. Your country is whatever we put in for the country. All right? The contact, the default is text. All right? And as we go through here, now we're validating. If we put nothing in the email address, we get this field as required. If we put in nothing for the phone, we get this field as required. If we put in nothing for the country, if we leave it right where it was as please select a country, it stays there. Do all those make sense? We are checking the values that are in there. Is valid is a flag. If it passed the test, is valid will be true. If it failed the test, is valid will be false. Not only that, this is the coolest part. Am I biased? I guess so. But the next 4 pages are on how to add and remove stuff from the DOM. What this says is while your website is up and running, you can add things to it or remove things from it. All right. Maybe you've heard of this before. Maybe you've gone out to a site like this. But let's say that I go out to a site and they say, what is your favorite color? And I say, blue. And they say, what is your second favorite color? And I say, red. And they say, would you rather have your screen have a red background with blue text or a blue background with red text? All right, maybe I don't want either, maybe or neither. All right, so let's say I choose one. I choose a blue background with red text. That is adding something to the web page as the web page is up and running. Does that make sense? Think about this, because this is where this is really used. Take a guess if you don't know, because you'll probably guess right. I've got 2 websites, let's say. One's called Just for Kids, okay? And one's called Just for Old People. All right? Which one do you think is going to have more bright, flashing pictures? Which one? I would agree. Which one's going to have bigger text? Yeah. But maybe I wanted it to come in and at the beginning, I wanted to give you an option of changing the text size to double what it currently was. Now that's not going to work real well on a phone, but it might work real nice on this machine. I mean, when you look at this, look on the screen. That's much easier for me to read than that is. All right? Now, this is the most powerful, in my opinion, property right there. See this? InnerHTML allows you to write anything you want, basically, anywhere you want, basically, on a web page. All right? So let's look. What do we got here? This is an image list. Next week, towards the end of the week, you're going to have a test just on Chapter 6. But before we do that, we're going to go over Chapter 7. I'm not going to test you on it. We will have a written test, but no other kind of test. All right? And then we're going to go into the last part of the class, which is on jQuery. Don't worry about that right now. Right? But the point is, have you ever seen something like this on a page where you might have 4 little thumbnail pictures, and you click one, and underneath it, you get a big copy of just that picture? All right? That would be an image list. That's one way that you can use them. Now, the system may or may not know that when you click on one of these, you want to see a big copy of it. So you've got to write code that does that. So what we're doing is we're telling the system, hey, if I clicked on this one, then the InnerHTML should be the first image. If I click on this one, it should be image 2, this one image 3, this one image 4. So you can use the InnerHTML property to write or place, display anything you want, anywhere you want on a web page. That's why, in my humble opinion, it's the most powerful thing there is when you use a website. Now, if you want to be able to take a look at this and kind of see what's happening, we've looked at this before, but I'm going to bring it up anyway. I'm just going to bring up, let me bring up CNN.com. All right, so there it is. And so that's what's up there right now. Okay, I'm going to go and hit the F12 key. We've looked at some of this stuff before. There's funny. Look at, they've got an error in their own code. See that? But the point is, I can take my mouse and I can click right here, and it's going to show me whatever's active. I can actually go in and I can grab a copy of this whole website. I can change the picture that's in there. All right. Would I want to do that? No. But the point is, I could. Yeah, come on. Let me turn that off. Come on. So if I wanted to change this so that look on the screen, I wouldn't do this. But if let's just say I'm a weirdo or I think I'm funny, I could remove that and put somebody else's picture in there. It would only be on my copy. It wouldn't be on CNN, but I could do that. And then I could say, deserter wanted for murder spotted in, I could change that. Spotted in downtown Wentzville. All right. So you can make changes to a page while the page is up and running. And that's what the author is getting to here. You can look at the elements panel here. So F12, and then look at the elements panel, and I can change anything I want. All right. So let's assume for a second that I want to change the background color to black. Oh, there is a way to do it. Maybe I don't remember it right now, but you can do that. You can come in there and I could change that to £000, and I could come into this and I could change the background color to pound, or the color of the text, to FFF. And notice I've changed that. This one. All right. See that? I can go in and manually, I don't do this very often, but you can do that if you want to. If you say, wow, that's really cool, how do you do that? Go read this section here and they'll explain some of it to you. But what's neat about that, you can take your own site and say, well, how would it look if I made it this color in the background? You don't have to change the CSS. You can go into your elements panel and change it in there. It's not permanently changed unless you change it and save it. But it's kind of neat because it allows you can change fonts, you can change whatever it is you want to change. And see, did that help? Did that hurt? Does it look better? Does it look worse, etc. All right. All right. The last part of the chapter, starting on page 192. All right. We've been going an hour, so let's stop right now. And I'm going to give you 10:11. Let's come back at 10:25, and we'll finish the chapter up.